Hi everyone, welcome back. Michael Sandler here, your host on Inspire Nation. Does fear and anxiety or phobias bother you, slow you down, or keep you from being at your best? If so, then do we have the show for you. Today we're talking with Dr. John P. Forsyth, PhD, an internationally recognized author, speaker, and trainer in the use of acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, and practices that cultivate mindfulness, loving kindness, and compassion. He's also the best-selling co-author of the Mindfulness and Acceptance Workbook for Anxiety, which we'll be talking about today. I'm excited for this talk because in this day and age, it's almost impossible to escape anxiety and fear, and John might even say it's helpful or useful for us. So today we'll talk about what anxiety, fear, phobias, and worries are all about, and how you can stop pushing them away, but instead break free from them or even have compassion for them, so you can feel better, experience greater freedom, and live the life you want to live. That plus why you don't want to scratch the anxiety itch, ways to use bubble wands manufacturers never thought of, why you should never tune in to anxiety radio, and why you must never, never, ever think of pink elephants beginning right now. Well, welcome to the show, John. Are you ready to shine?
I am ready to shine, Michael. Thank you for having me on.
Well, thank you so much for being on, and a mighty woohoo! Woohoo! So I've got to ask, it's kind of a loaded dice question, but before we dive right into things, are fear and anxiety really bad for us?
Well, the truth is we need them. So the reason we've survived so long as a species is because we've had the capability to feel fear, and to experience anxiety. And so, we need them. And without them, you wouldn't be able to, run away from a bear or a car swerving at you on the road or respond to dangers or threats outside of you. So we absolutely need them.
So the idea of blocking fear, of pushing fear away, or of getting to a place where we have no fear, that wouldn't serve us very well in our modern world.
No, but unfortunately, the modern world and many cultures support this idea that we need to push this out, that fear and anxiety is bad, there's something that you can't have and experience to go forward and live a vital, meaningful life. So people get stuck in this strange loop of wanting to go forward, and then the natural fear and anxiety bubbles up, and then they stop and they struggle.
So how many people today have fear and anxiety disorders or challenges around this?
Well, the estimates, it really depends where you look, but generally, we're talking about 30 plus million people in the United States alone, and that's not even including kids and adolescents. And, anxiety is ubiquitous, so it's all over the world. Everyone's experienced it, but people who actually struggle with it, we're talking, 30 million or so individuals. And, many of them you wouldn't even know walking down the street. So I like to use this example that if everyone with an anxiety problem were wearing a red hat, you'd have a hard time going about your day without seeing somebody wearing a red hat. It's that common.
And could you even argue that sooner or later we're going to put on a red hat ourselves?
Yeah, it's right, because, as human beings, we're wired in a sense to turn away from pain. Mm-hmm. So again, that served us well, helped us from being lunch to predators. We experience anxiety and fear, and so it's natural to turn away from pain, to turn away from a hot stove, or you get burned, or other sources of pain. And the problem is when we turn it on ourselves and we turn it on the host, and we start to try to get away from ourselves, our own internal pain, our own feelings, our bodily sensations. And that sets us up for struggle.
So that's an interesting way to look at it. So what you're saying is that fight or flight response can actually be a fight or flight response from our own selves, in which case we're in the run of our life because you can't get away from yourself, and so you start a vicious cycle?
Yeah, and it, part of it is something we've learned from a very young age, that the control works so well outside of us. So, if you don't like the walls in your bed, the colors of your walls in the bedroom, you can go and buy some paint and change them. You can take out the garbage if you want to get rid of the garbage in your house. You can go apply for a job if you want to do that. There's so many places outside of our skin where control works wonderfully. And then naturally we learn that, well, it must work for our thoughts and our feelings, especially the things we don't like very much. So as we experience those, we tend to want to control them and get rid of them and change them. And actually the science shows that actually makes things worse. So when
this is kind of a what you resist persists. If I will push it away until it pushes back stronger.
Yeah, absolutely. I like just to simplify it and say, look, if you don't want it, you've got it. And so, it's one of those things that...
so I can open the door and say, come on in.
Well, yeah, that's the hard part, because our natural tendency, it's like, dodgeball with our emotions. When the feelings show up that are painful, our tendency is to, put up our hands and turn away. And I would say, actually, that would be a wonderful thing to do if you could do that and live your life wholeheartedly. But the problem is life invites obstacles, problems, and pain, especially around things that we care about. So when we step in a direction of something we want to do, life throws at us these pains and difficulties, and our tendency is to do this, which means that we're not going forward and actually taking steps and doing things that really matter to us. And so life is not being lived.
You have some beautiful, inspiring quotes in your book that are all talking about from M. Scott Peck, from Joyce Meyer, from Oprah Winfrey, that are and more, all talking about how it's the moments that are most difficult, the moments when we are experiencing that stress and anxiety, that may actually be the most beautiful or powerful, not negative, positive moments in our lives, if we're not chasing our tail.
Yeah, I think that's right. That, again, many of us have learned that pain is the enemy. And another way to look at it is pain, which I consider anxiety and fear painful. Nobody likes it, but we've all experienced it at some point. So looking at pain instead of as the enemy, but maybe as a teacher, that, maybe inside of the feeling of anxiety, there's a message that, it tells you that you care enough to feel strongly about something.
I like that. It's like before this show here, and oftentimes before the show, because I have to read a book a day, there's a point, usually about an hour or so before, where I'm going, and even if I'm beyond prepared, there's a point at which the little signal goes off at me that says, you're not prepared, Michael.
Yeah, there's the mind rushes in,
the wiggly worm. And I have a choice at that point. I can try to push it away. That doesn't work. Or I can go, well, it's just time to surf this wave of kind of creative angst, which just means that I've got a great show that's going to take place soon.
Yeah, absolutely. It can be your friend or your enemy. And I think a lot of it really depends on how you respond to it. Like many people who really suffer and struggle with anxiety, and again, I think that includes me. I've struggled and had my own difficulties. And
I'll raise my hand here as well.
Yeah. That we tend to respond, in a way that's very defensive and unfriendly. So it's really like battling ourselves and fighting a war with ourselves instead of opening up to, this is my experience. Doesn't mean you like it. Doesn't mean you choose it. But the path forward is, like you said, where you say, okay, there's my mind. My mind is doing its thing, and there's my body doing its thing. And here's this important thing that I want to do and show up for in my life. Can I carry this with me? Can I take it along for the ride, essentially?
I've had a lot of top-tier guests on the show who have talked about actually the greatest success comes from dancing on the edge of the cliff or willing to go off the edge. And they're not talking about insanely risking their lives, but what they're talking about is often said, like Kamal Ravikant, amazing entrepreneur. He has a book, Love Yourself Like Your Life Depends on It. And he talks about that if you feel fear, that's actually the direction you want to go in. That's like your best friend saying, I've got something special if you can find a way to get through this doorway.
No, absolutely. I think it's dead on with that. That that if you think of somebody, for instance, that's anxious in social situations where they, just being around people brings on thoughts of being humiliated or embarrassed, or even the tightness in the chest and heart pounding. If they come to see somebody for help or they search for help, and they often see the anxiety as the problem in the social situations. But with that inside of that anxiety, if you could put your hand inside of it, it's probably telling you that I care enough about other people in my relationships that to feel what I'm feeling, to even go seek help about it. Otherwise, there's no law in the universe that says you have to like being around people. But that anxiety and that fear is there to alert us that, hey, something really matters to us in this moment.
That's awesome. You're flipping it on its head.
Yeah, essentially. Yeah. We're turning it from really a barrier to a life lived well to, something that can alert us to what's wise and what's important in us. And the other part too is that, I like to think of it as, everything we feel and think is kind of in the mix, sort of a product of our history. It's like we're vessels and we collect experiences throughout our lives, and certain situations are going to trigger strong feelings and emotions, but also inside of that means that, hey, you care enough to feel strongly about this. And I think that gets missed because, again, when fear and anxiety show up, we harden and we shut down.
Yeah, you talk about forming a kinder and compassionate relationship with your mind and body. Maybe you can explain more what that means, because you're talking about kind and compassion to mind and body, and kind and compassion to your fear and anxiety. Yeah.
So I think, again, that the stance that we often take as human beings to our pain is one of struggle and resistance. And, sometimes I'll invite other people and myself to, imagine that, these feelings and thoughts that you have that you may not like very much are a friend or, somebody you would like to get to know. And so from that perspective, then, how would you greet them? How would you respond to your anxiety if it were a tiny child that were being placed in your arms?
Whoa.
Yeah. Or a butterfly in your hands. Would you, squash it, throw it away, or would you gently hold it, maybe bring it close to your chest? And that is something we can do. Anxiety is not a choice, and we emphasize that in the book. That nobody chooses anxiety, but the choice is, what do you do with it when it shows up? And it turns out we have a lot of control over what we do with anxiety when it shows up. And being kinder is a choice we can make, or to struggle and resist.
I think that's why I love your book so much, is that it has so many different exercises you can go through. And I read it from cover to cover. That's not the best way you want to go through it. Because then, like, we're talking off air. So which exercise do you like the most? And I'm like, I don't know, pink elephant? What? Huh?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So, but maybe we can start at the basics here. We'll back up one step first. What is ACT? And then let's jump from there into a real basic exercise that people can try to get centered.
Yeah, sure. ACT is an acronym that stands for Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. But it's not just a therapy. I think inside of ACT is an approach to living. And so, I could talk about, there's a science behind ACT. There's lots of research studies. There's plenty of evidence supporting its use. But the basic idea is that that a good deal of human suffering comes about partly because of the mind and partly because of our learning and conditioning, which teaches us to struggle and avoid our own experiences. And so that effort takes up enormous energy and attention, and you could think of it as all that energy and attention being poured into not thinking and not feeling and not remembering is attention and energy and effort away from living the life that you really want to lead and the things that matter to you. So ACT stands for learning to accept basically what we cannot control and change. So these tend to be things within us, our thoughts and our feelings and our memories. And then choosing, so that's the C part, so making a choice of what you want to be about. If it's not about trying to change your internal weather,
Yeah.
or the way your mind works, what do you want to be about? Where do you want to put your attention and your energy? And then the T is for taking action. And it's not any kind of action. It's actually taking steps in directions. We call them value directions, or directions that matter to you, so that at someday, at some point, you can look back and say, I did the best that I could. I lived my life in a way that was consistent with my heart, my intentions. And so ACT stands for all three, which makes it a little different than sort of other contemplative practices, Buddhist practices, where there's a heavy emphasis on meditation and mindfulness, and we know that's beneficial. There's no doubt about that, and it's inside of ACT too. But what's unique, I think, about ACT is it links mindfulness practices, acceptance skills, compassion, loving kindness with doing what matters. So they're both connected. So, almost pasted up. So it's the open, accepting, loving stance that gives you the freedom to put your attention and your energy and your actions where you want them to be in your life.
I like that. And I'm thinking back to when you said the A and accept, and putting your energy where you want it. Because if you fight to keep something away, I don't want to think about that now. I don't want to think about that now. The joke in the book is don't think of a pink elephant.
Right. Yeah.
So everybody, don't think of a pink elephant.
Right.
All right. How'd that one work for you? And so if you're spending all day saying, I don't want to think about it, I don't want to think about it. For instance, with the show, if I have something I don't want to think about and I'm going to push that off, then I better actually probably dive into it right away and at least think about it for 1 second and get a touch on it so that I can free up my mind to get back on task.
Yeah, absolutely. If we can't do that thing that you just instructed, don't think about a pink elephant. If you and I can't do it here, talking in this relatively non-threatening setting
where there aren't many pink elephants running around.
Right. How are we going to do it outside when the thoughts are, I'm not enough. I'm going to embarrass myself. What if I remember that painful trauma? The things that I lived through before. What if I'm humiliated? What if my family leaves me? What if my health deteriorates? If we can't do it with a simple, don't think about the pink elephant, how are we going to do it with these other more emotionally charged thoughts? There's just no life inside of that. It's really a battle against our very essence. It's a fight against ourselves. It's really a war, like a tug of war, like we talk about in the book too.
So let's talk about starting to, how do I put this? Put put some water on the war, take it to a nice, kind, loving place. I wonder if you can start with us by explaining, you have very early in the book that really, it comes up multiple times through the book, a short centering exercise. And so I'm wondering if you can kind of lead us just through a 1-minute version of this that helps us start to get, to turn down the flame, so to speak.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So, the centering exercise is one which will help us just to be present right where we are and to be connected with our intentions. So I normally invite people to get in a comfortable position in their chair and just to rest their hands on their lap, palms up or palms down. It doesn't really matter. Then to gently close their eyes.
So don't do this if you're driving.
Yes, that's important. And then just to bring the awareness to the breath. And so just to notice, the rising and the falling of your chest and belly as you breathe in, and then as you breathe out. And then just to allow your awareness to drift to the place where you sit and notice what it's like to sit where you sit. There's nothing to do. There's nothing to be except just to be here, right where you are. and breathe. And then just allow your awareness to pour down over your knees slowly, down your shins to your feet. And just gently press your feet into the earth and remind yourself that you're here, awake, alert, and alive, grounded to the earth. And as you continue to breathe, grounded and centered here in this place, imagine that there's more and more space being created within you with each breath. And then in that space, even if it's tiny, I'd like to invite you to get connected with your intentions. So what do you want to be about? What do you care about? Where do you want to go with your life? And just allow your intentions to fill that space within you. Maybe it's a space close to your heart. And you can continue just to sit present for as long as you wish. But when you're ready, I'd like to invite you to open your eyes and then to hold those intentions gently close to your heart as you go about your day.
It's kind of like having intentions open on your desktop.
Yeah, in a way it is. Yeah,
maybe it's a widget right on your screen.
And that's really important because within ACT, and actually just in life in general, that knowing what we know about human nature, if you're not clear about your intentions and what you want to be about and what you want to do, then our choices become fickle and capricious, and we basically, we get to a fork in the road, we'll choose the path of least resistance, the one that won't invite the difficulty, because that's just what we're wired to do. But if you have your intentions clear, like, that at this fork in the road, I really want to go right. I know it's going to be difficult and hard, and I might not like what I feel all the time. But you know what? That's important to me. And that's what I really care about, and that's what I want. So that's what life is inviting us sort of in that direction, but it goes against our very being, especially when it's difficult. It's almost like the things we care about are pasted up against the things we'd rather not feel and think. And that's what makes, living our values hard. I say, like, if it were easy, everybody would be doing it. There'd be no need for me or a self-help book like we wrote.
There's Dr. Merzenik we had on a few weeks back, father of brain plasticity. He talks about why that crack on the sidewalk is the greatest thing on the planet, which is that as soon as we make things a little bit more comfortable, a little bit easier, then we're not running toward life, we're running away from it.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful way to put it. There's really, I think, two choices with that. It's really going toward or away. So when you look at even sitting on your hands, I would consider it sort of an away move. Mm-hmm. And all these little efforts to be comfortable or not to be as anxious or worried or even upset or lonely. These little efforts, these little away moves buy us like a brief honeymoon from the pain. But over time, they add up to a life that's not being lived. And I think that's the worst kind of pain of them all. And when you look back and say, I'm not living my life, I'm not doing the things that I care about.
You even have a exercise you call the funeral meditation.
Yeah, that's a big one. Yeah. That exercise, it sounds morbid and everything, but the idea is that it's to recognize that all of us at some point are going to die, and there's no escaping that truth. We're the only creatures we know of that are aware that someday it will all end. Mm. And so it just invites people in a very gentle way to imagine the time of their funeral, and to get in touch with, the words that people are saying about them, those words that they want to hear, and to really kind of look at what's being said or maybe what's not being said, and as a way to help them connect with what they care about. Mm-hmm. Because, you hear often people who've had, near-death experiences, and I know you've had some pretty scary experiences yourself, or terrible accidents and losses. It's usually in those moments that people wake up. Yeah. They suddenly look at their lives and say, oh my God, what am I spending my time with? I need to change course. This is not what I want to be about. I don't want to be at the office 7 days a week. I am doing things that, don't really matter to me, which can include spending a lot of time trying to beat anxiety and fear or any other painful emotion. And so in ACT, what we're trying to do with that funeral meditation is almost to gently bring people to that point of waking up, is really to see, do you want your tombstone to read? Here lies Sally, she struggled all her life with panic disorder, or fear or phobia or worry. Nobody puts those things on their tombstones. And you don't hear about them in eulogies. And it's because, at some level, that's not what people want to be known for in the end. And
it's fascinating because we might not want to be known for it at the end, but we all grab onto labels. So I'm a germaphobe, I'm a thisaphobe, I'm a, and then we hardwire it into ourselves to make it a part of our identity.
Yeah, and that can be a trap. We call it, and one of the mind traps is that, we attach to these labels and we fail to see that it's just, the mind doing its thing. Our minds are always judging and evaluating and labeling. We can label just about anything, including ourselves. And then we hold on to that even though it's self-limiting. And so one of the really important things in this approach, or I'd say even a mindfulness approach generally to anxiety and fear, is to start to take a perspective. And so, you and I have lots of experience, and everyone else listening has experience taking a perspective. I mean, you can ask your listeners just to pause and look around where they are, and they could see the trees maybe, or other people, or objects in their house. From a very young age, that's how we've come into the world, is to take a perspective. And so the neat thing is we can do it with our mind, with our emotional life, with our physical sensations, with our memories. And inside of that is even more profound idea that if you can do that, then you cannot be it, the thing that you're thinking.
I
right?
love it. Woo!
Yeah, and that's freeing. Because
you can't be afraid. This is an important one. So you can't be the fear if you're looking at a fear. You can't be afraid if you're looking at you being afraid, because then you got to ask the question, well, then who's the one being afraid? It's not me. Oh, wait a second. I don't have to be that. And that's huge.
Yeah, and it could be scary for people too. When they have, if you've constructed your life around, and it's not the person's fault. I want to emphasize that too. There's a whole cultural conditioning of feel-goodism, and you can't have anxiety and fear and be happy. But when you construct your life around this, to suddenly begin to learn that I'm not this stuff. Basically we say people have gotten hooked. It's sort of like the mind is wonderful in many ways, but also can be unhelpful in other ways, and we literally become hooked. Yeah.
It's weird because fear, I'm looking at fear as a guest, a visitor, sometimes wanted, sometimes unwanted. Wanted if I need to cross the road safely, unwanted if I'm preparing for the show and, self-doubt creeps in. But there's a difference between having a guest come in, even an uninvited guest, and then, I don't know if it's marrying the guest or getting confused between who's the guest and who's me.
Right. Yeah, and that is part of this. The struggle is without the perspective. Mm-hmm. There's no way to see that you're having thoughts as thoughts. So, I like to use the example with people of like, imagine your hands are your thoughts and you hold them like this.
Okay, so you've got your hands crisscrossed together for everybody who can't see it. Their fingers are interwoven, yeah.
Yeah, and then this is something you don't like very much. Now put that right up to your nose.
So you put your hand up to your nose, yep.
Yep, so you're kind of peering through the fingers trying to have an interview with Michael. And we could stay like this for the rest of the interview. And so it's impossible to live your life this way, being run by those thoughts. So what we try to teach people is to be able to get perspective and move the hands back. So here's the thought, that I'm not prepared. And then there's life around here. And that's what we're really trying to get people in touch with. But it requires that perspective taking. And ACT teaches that not just as a subtle mind manipulation trick, but with the perspective. Then you're freed up with your attention to look around and say, what do I want to be about? And what do I want? Yeah.
So let's take the remainder of this time, because I was noticing as your hands were woven together and across your face, the interview still had to continue. Life still has to continue. Even if you're trying to hide from it, it's still there. And in fact, you're not very functional. You're quite dysfunctional. How's that? The fun has been put back in dysfunctional at that point.
Yeah.
But it's still going on. So maybe you can share with us some ways that we start to do a little bit of a tango or a dance or embrace or have love and kindness and compassion for our fear, so we can start to move forward down the path. And I'm going to recommend everybody, it's a shameless plug, go out and get this book, because it can make a big difference, even taking baby steps. And that seems to be a theme that comes up with everybody today, is small steps in. Mm-hmm. So what would be a few easy small steps we could take?
Well, I think the first one is to really recognize that again, the anxiety is not a choice, and that the struggle with it.
Which also means that you're not a bad person.
No.
If you have anxiety, I'm a weak person because I feel fear, anxiety. No, you're human, you have a pulse.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And you need those feelings. So really looking at the struggle itself and coming to a place of that you've had enough with it. We call it like dropping the rope. So, a lot of times, and I actually happen to have one, Michael. So
perfect.
so the first, basically the first part is it's impossible to do something new unless you're willing to let go of what hasn't worked. Right. So to make space for new possibilities, we need to let go of things that are keeping us stuck. And so we have a metaphor where, people are literally in this tug of war with the anxiety monster.
So he's got a rope in between his hands, and he's pulling the rope. If you're not watching this on YouTube, back and forth. He's playing tug of war with himself. Yep.
Yeah. And so this goes on and on. They're trying to beat the anxiety, maybe try to cope with it, medicate it, sleep it off, hide from it. And as long as you're holding the rope, your hands are tied up. There's no space to do anything else.
You can't grab onto anything else. You're not open.
Not open. So the first thing to do is to drop that rope and say, I'm not going to continue to fight. Now, I'm not saying that's easy. One of the things we do is we teach people how to drop the rope, but it's to choose. It's basically to make that choice that the struggle itself has cost you. In the coin of time, energy, frustration, limiting your life, all the energy poured into that. So is to let go of that struggle. And then that frees up your hands, frees up your attention and your feet to now do something differently. So the first one is that. And then the second piece is...
Can I stop you there for a second?
Sure.
Is there a tip? Because I can feel people behind me listening to this. And I've been there time and time again in my own life, where you're really holding on, and it's really hard on such a core level to let go. How do we start to do that?
Yeah. So letting go, I think, it takes willingness. Many people who really struggle with anxiety don't know what the anxiety or the fear would be like, with sort of arms wide open, with hands freed up, to just experience it just as it is, right? So you start with baby steps, and you start by first cultivating your, I'd say, mindful awareness, or we call it mindful acceptance, is to practice noticing there's a distinction between you and your thoughts, you and your physical sensations, what your body does, you and your emotions, and you and your memories, which were actually more thoughts, and you and your judgmental mind constantly rushing in saying, you can't do this, you're bad, you're worthless, it's too much.
And that's not you, and recognizing that.
Actually recognizing that I can notice my thoughts as thoughts. I can notice my feelings as feelings. I can notice sensations just as sensations. So what we do is we take the anxiety monster, which tends to be overwhelming, and we unpack it. So we unpack it into
take it out of the suitcase.
Its parts. Yeah, it's smaller parts. And, sometimes they ask people, as we unpack the anxiety monster, is there anything in that physical sensation that is absolutely your enemy? So like we could say that I've worked with a number of people who struggle with panic and fear. So, they'll talk about their heart racing and being dizzy and out of breath and feeling hardness and tightness in their muscles and also thoughts of losing control and dying. And so we just slow things down and mindfully we pick a sensation and we say it's sweatiness, and then we look into that and we say, is there anything in that sweatiness that's absolutely your enemy that you cannot have? And then I invite them to breathe into it, just that one sensation, and they can notice that and continue that, breathing into it, making space for it. And then we move on to the next part of the anxiety monster, where somebody might be, okay, their heart's beating fast. So is there anything in that fast heartbeat that's you're absolutely at war with and that's your enemy? And then get them to breathe into it, make space, and just to allow it to be and to observe it from that safe perspective, that silent observer.
So rather than panicking about the heart racing and it's racing so much my heart might explode, which I'm not belittling that at all. I get it. I really, really get it. But you're going, and can I just be okay with that and just even have love for my heart racing? It's quite all right, heart. You do what you need to do. We're going to be okay. We'll get through this.
Yeah, and you might not even have to. You can certainly be kind in the words, like it's going to be okay. I'm whole and I'm complete. But just what you even said, how your mind rushed in, like my heart's going to explode. Like there's a thought, right? There's a thought that comes rushing in. My heart.
Not a very positive one at that point.
yeah. And so to notice that that's a thought. Now your mind is doing its thing. This is, sometimes I invite people just to notice, like, is that an old thought? Like if that thought were a food, in your cupboard, in your kitchen, or in your pantry, how old would it be? Like would it be appetizing to you? And more importantly, I think when you look at the thoughts that rush in, is to ask this question, is that thought helpful as far as you living the kind of life you want to lead? So when you listen to my heart is going to explode, does it move you toward the life you want to have, the things that really matter to you, or does it move you away? So it's almost like the mind is a tool. And actually, some evolutionary psychologists, and even in my circles in psychology, starting to talk about the mind is evolving, or has evolved, because it was a useful tool.
It was a safety mechanism.
Yeah, well, it allowed our early ancestors to be able to talk about tomorrow that hasn't happened and to talk about yesterday. So, where was the food? And they could sit around the fire, but absent that, and to keep us safe and alive, but absent that, we'd be sitting around in the cave around the campfire, just grunting and, grabbing each other's scraps of meat and tools and hides and maybe even our mates, right? And there's no way to talk about planning for tomorrow. So the mind is absolutely evolved as a tool. And so, but we don't think of it that way. We think of it as us, and we take our thoughts so literally and so seriously. So the perspective taking, as we step back from our thoughts, the next critical question is really to ask ourselves, okay, here's my mind, my old history, feeding me this news. Is this thought helpful to me in the service of me doing what matters, me living the life that I want to lead? So that's like the key piece with this.
Is it serving me?
Yeah, it's not. You don't have to think about it as dysfunctional or functional or catastrophic or obsessional. But rather, the simple question, because those are all judgments and evaluations, like this is unacceptable, there's another judgment, like this is too much. But rather, when I listen to what my mind is giving me, and I really buy into this, is it helpful in terms of what I want to be about in this life, what I care about? So think of it as as a tool. So, again, part of this is slowing things down, practicing being present. Big thing is to drop the rope and practice dropping the rope. And, I always say to people, you're probably going to get hooked into struggling with the anxiety monster again and again, because that's kind of the old habit, but it's to recognize when we pick up the rope again and start to struggle, and then to choose to let it go.
Hey, wait, I've got a rope in my hands.
I've got a rope in my hands. And, I worked with somebody once where we did this exercise, and she had a hard time dropping the rope, and I was playing the anxiety monster, and we're getting pulled all around the office, and usually I'm the one that gets dragged around. And so, she's got her feet dug in, and she's fighting like hard, like hell, really, to beat me. And so we went on, and I just kept asking her, is there anything else you could do? And she said she started pulling harder. We talked about how she had tried that in other ways. Like she tried pulling harder by using meditation to beat the anxiety, by taking other medications, by going in and out of therapy, by staying away from crowds. And then, it looked like this battle was just going to keep going. And then I said, you said you have a young daughter, and is it okay if we put her on the sidelines here watching us have this tug of war? And she said, sure. So the young daughter's there, and I said, now she's looking at you, and she'd like you to read her a bedtime story, but she's waiting for you to beat me. What would you do in this case? And immediately she dropped the rope and went to her daughter. Woohoo! And I think it goes to illustrate is when you put your value, like all that struggle, and I do emphasize this a lot because that's our natural tendency. It ties us up, just like in the tug of war. And we ask people to trust their experience. So even your listeners, don't trust me or listen to me necessarily, but trust your experience. And I just ask people, like, how has this struggle worked? Has it really delivered the goods in terms of peace of mind and the kind of life you want to lead? Have you actually?
It's a spiral. It's not serving us, and it takes us one more notch, and so that protective mechanism, if you can recognize it, you can stop it. Because if not, there's no end.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the perspective taking in mindfulness is part of that. That's a skill. And so some people, I've seen too, who've come for help, who have been practicing, mindfulness in sort of the Buddhist tradition for a long time as a way to beat the anxiety. And
I've seen this too. It's using it to numb themselves out in a sense.
Yeah, and they come to act, and they almost have an epiphany, which, I think inside the Buddhist tradition that we know that mindfulness is not supposed to be a clever like gold shovel to dig yourself out of anxiety, but that's how often people will use it. And so anything that, as long as your agenda is to beat the anxiety, I could give you the most wonderful new technique. Here's compassion practice, and you may use it as a shovel to dig. And so the first thing to do is to recognize that digging is not the way out of a hole. It actually makes holes bigger. And
you talk about a mouse in the story who ends up, I love it. The mouse, there's one mouse scurries from the cat and makes it out of danger into a hole. And the other mouse, what happened to it?
Yeah, the other mouse was looking for a crumb up on the cupboard and slipped off and fell into a bucket of cream. And immediately the mouse panicked and started swimming around frantically and getting exhausted and found there was no way to get out. But then eventually recognized it, said, wait a minute, I'm in a bucket of cream. And slowed down a bit and just slowed down and took some sips of the cream and slowed the pace. And then, eventually, this would be a very large mouse, but eventually, finished off the cream and did not drown. The problem is that with anxiety, when we fall into that bucket of anxiety or fear, our natural tendency is to struggle and to try to get out. And that just exhausts us, and it's just effortful, and there's no life inside of that. And so the part of this is, in a way, like I know a word you've mentioned before on the show, is learning to surrender, that this is not a fight that you have to win in order to have the life you want. And I think that goes against the cultural mainstream that teaches us you need to.
I think it gets at the crux at something that has worked, though, for decades, which is AA, Alcoholics Anonymous. And the 12-step program, I think it's number one, is surrender. That's it. Step one, surrender. If you can't get past step one, surrender.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, the ACT message inside of acceptance is a little bit like that. People love the Serenity Creed, accept what you cannot change, change what you can, and then develop the wisdom to know the difference. And the problem that people run into, despite loving that, is they don't know the difference between what they can and cannot change. So, we know that we have limited control over what we think and what we feel. Like I use the exercise sometimes, like twinkle, twinkle, little, and
don't think of toes.
Yeah,
sugar.
Exactly. And I can pretty much guarantee you, growing up, if you grew up in the West, you're probably thinking star, and but that's your old history. Or sometimes I'll use Little Miss Muffet sat on a, and for some people they'll say tough it, and I ask people, like, when's the last time you used the word tough it? Pull up a tough it and sit down. So that stuff is just in our history. There's no, and we know from neuroscience, modern neuroscience, there's no way to get rid of this stuff. Our nervous systems are additive, not subtractive. So what goes in stays in, short of brain insult or injury. But the good news is that you can add to that mix. You can add something new to get something new. And so that involves, changing our relationship with what our mind gives us, what our body dishes out, those old memories that pop up, just like twinkle, twinkle, little. That's not a choice, what you're thinking right now. It just happens. And so how do you greet that star when it shows up, when it's painful and difficult? And that is where the skills come in of learning to pay attention, to be more gentle and kind, to let go of the rope so you're freed up to do what matters and to move with the fear, move with the anxiety, move with the judgmental mind. Take it all along for the ride. That's what life is asking us to do.
I love it. And then look at the star that's come in and realize maybe that's actually a star that belongs on top of your Christmas tree.
Absolutely.
It could be a positive.
Absolutely. Yeah, that fear and anxiety, like we talked about at the beginning, can alert us to what really matters, that we feel strongly about that, so it's absolutely not the barrier unless we allow it to be, unless we use this metaphor of you driving your life bus, and what happens often is we feel like we're far from the life that matters and stuck and struggling, is that fear has gotten into the driver's seat. And fear has taken over the life bus and has the hands on the wheel and the foot on the pedal, and is taking us
white knuckle grip,
white knuckling and taking our life bus in directions we don't want to go. So I sometimes ask people, like, whose life is this? When you turn it over to the fear, or the anxious mind, or the judgmental mind, what happens? And many people will say, "I don't get to live my life."
Bingo.
And so we teach people to stay in that driver's seat, even though the passengers are there. Don't go right, turn left. Don't go toward your career. Stay home instead.
Do what's safe.
Yeah, to what's safe.
So before we wrap things up,
sure.
I want to ask you about a different tool that's equally important: the bubble wand.
Oh, you like the bubble wand? Yeah, the bubble wand is an exercise that you can actually do, if the weather permitting and so on. But we just, kids have probably played with little bubble soap and outside and blowing bubbles. And what we invite people to do is to watch their thoughts and to imagine them, each one as they come, is to sort of drifting into a bubble, and then watch that bubble as it blows in the wind and drifts out of sight, and then the next thought and the next thought. And to make this more real, you could actually go get some bubble soap and do it outside.
And I highly encourage anyone, if it's not too cold outside, because you can't help but get an ear-to-ear grin when you're playing with a bubble wand. It's just not possible. And don't go for the little 1-inch one. Go for one of the big ones they've got these days and make these big bubbles and have fun with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the key thing is that, again, thinking about there's no room to grow for anxiety and fear to grow when it's being watered with powerful antidotes, which are letting go of the fight, because anxiety and fear need that struggle to grow. So saying, I'm not going to fight this anymore. I'm going to get curious about it. I'm going to meet my own body and mind and soul and spirit with kindness. I'm going to water my life with kindness. I'm going to be gentle like a friend with my experience. Doesn't mean you like it, but you open up to it. And then I'm going to use that extra energy I have and attention to really get clear about what do I want to do and cultivate that willingness muscle, which is really important, I think, is the willingness to take a step in a direction that you care about and really a leap of faith, but to bring along your mind, to bring along your body, your emotions with you. It's
so important. You're cherishing yourself by doing that.
Yeah, and your life will get bigger when you do that, and also we grow. So you build this willingness muscle, because there's a saying that what you don't know you will fear, and what you fear then will control you. So what we're doing is getting to know the fear, getting to know ourselves, and changing that relationship we have that will give us the space needed. And actually, I think that the skills in the workbook, and I know you've talked about this on other shows, but cultivating mindfulness, kindness, compassion, gentleness, with an eye on the life you want to lead, those are how you cultivate the conditions for genuine happiness. And that, it's not about not feeling and not thinking. That's just impossible for us to do that. Even as hard as we try, it's just not, there's no healthy way I know of to have people to not have anxiety.
There's this movie I'm thinking of, I can't remember the name of it right now, where this guy, I guess he hits himself with a ball, keeps hitting himself in the face so that he doesn't have to think, and bang, wow, that feels good. Bang, wow, that feels good.
Yeah, we do so many things, and to not think.
I heart Huckabees. That's the movie.
That's the movie. Okay, no, but it's a wonderful visual for where our minds will take us if we let them. It's just thinking that's that's what I have to do, and so we're really trying to get people to open up to the possibility of as you lay down your arms with this needless fight, and you'll be positioned then to really do something that you care about. Yep. And even if it's hard to do, and that's where you get this sort of bittersweetness to life. It's not just bitter anymore. It's not the pain of anxiety plus the pain of not living your life. Now you're living your life even though it was challenging, even though it was difficult. And that's the bittersweetness of life. And
I think that can actually be the coolness in a sense, that even in the difficulty, my belief is we all came here to learn what we can debate on what that is, but we didn't come here to be born, to be safe, and then to die. That doesn't serve anyone.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So you might as well, hang your butt out there, have fun. And you don't have fun, I don't believe, hills and valleys, roller coasters. You don't have fun if it's a gentle, perfectly smooth, gonna experience nothing, gonna do nothing journey. You might as well stare at a wall. Yes. So that doesn't mean we need to become adrenaline junkies and go bungee jump.
Right, exactly.
Maybe it does, but it certainly means to embrace life. And I think everyone has experienced living life, feeling most alive, with a brush with something.
Absolutely.
The adrenaline starts going, and we're living.
Yes. And so you're absolutely right. It's like listening to your heart. You know, what pulls at your heartstrings? What are the things that really matter to you? And we help people clarify that in the workbook, because you need to know what you're living for, and that will, you know, change in terms of what you do, you know, how you get there. But, you know, living your values is like something you can do for the rest of your life and you'll never be done. So if you love exploring, there's so many steps you can take to nurture the value of exploring. You can travel,
and that you know, just to mention, that's something you can do through your workbook. Is for people who haven't read the book, is you go in and you can learn what your values are, and you can start to do these exercises to help get clarity on this.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the whole purpose of the book is to help people create the space within them, in free up the resources so that they can do what matters. They can live out their values in the way they wish. So that's where, you know, ACT is about that, you know, acceptance and mindfulness, and then the commitment and change part is to link those together, so that mindfulness and compassion and acceptance and kind of getting perspective with your mind allows you to pour your energy and attention and resources into living your values. And so that, to me, is the prize, you know, in the end, is a life lived well. And that's what we're trying to help people do, even when anxiety and fear show up, as they will sometimes, and seem to block the path. We learn how to carry them.
So a couple quick wrap-up questions here. First off, what would you tell parents who have kids who are facing, because this is a world where kids are overwhelmed, so kids who are facing fear and anxiety?
Yeah. I would say that, you know, one of the biggest things personally I think can be done is to model with them that it's okay to feel what you feel and think what you think. You know, I think
so. Parents, you're not getting out of the work.
No, and it's very hard for, you know, parents, especially nowadays, to not catastrophize about their children's feelings and thoughts, but to rather teach them that it's okay, that to feel what you're feeling, that you can still feel these feelings even though you don't like them, but you can be gentle with those feelings. So just like a mother's touch to a child, you know, when they're ill, we can bring that same touch to our children, comforting them, but not sending the message that, you know what, you really have to get rid of this, and that's a problem. Because I do think there's a tendency we all have is to, send that message even to younger children. And you've seen that over and over again in the playground, like, big boys don't cry, or stop crying, or I'll give you something to cry about. Kids learn to be silent but suffering, and that it's not okay to feel their feelings. So we want to validate them and to acknowledge them, but not to reward them as barriers to going forward.
Or so that they identify them. I'll take attention, good or bad. So if I show you that I'm afraid and I get a lollipop because I'm afraid, I'll show you what real fear looks like so I can get more lollipops.
Yeah, absolutely. We want to reward, obviously, like, the good behaviors, or the healthy behaviors for our kids. And then also to not send the message, I'd say, that anxiety and fear and other unpleasant feelings are problems that have to be overcome, but instead are experiences that all of us have that we can learn to gently move with through life, and that they may be teachers,
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
So a last wrap-up question that I ask all of our guests, which is, what brings you personally the greatest happiness, or what I call the woohoo factor?
Well, I'm going to say, right off the bat is, obviously there's more than one, but I would say, my relationship with my wife, and then my kids. And then I think the third piece is making a difference, getting out there and really helping people to break free from needless suffering, the kinds of traps that as human beings we all face that can keep us stuck, and really kind of sending that message to others that there is a way forward, and it's okay to be exactly who you are. That you don't need to change your history, the things you've lived with. You can learn to be just who you are and be okay just as you are. You have everything you need.
You're perfect. just as you are. And I don't say that lightly. You are perfect just as you are, no matter how you are.
Absolutely. And that's the message we try to really cultivate in the workbook too, that the only thing that needs to change is the way we relate with ourselves, that relationship, treating our emotional life like a friend or another person into a loving, maybe it's a partner or a child, how would you treat them, and bring that same love and care to ourselves and our experience. And that opens up doors, that frees up space, that is actually a kinder way to be toward ourselves.
Yay.
Yeah, it's neat.
So where can people go to find out more and to get your workbook?
Okay, well, I have a website, which is just drjohnforsyth.com. Mm-hmm. And they can find the first edition of the workbook and a few other books we've done on Amazon or on Barnes & Noble and other major booksellers. And then the new edition, the updated and expanded edition of the workbook, the Mindfulness Acceptance Workbook for Anxiety, that will be out early spring. And it's available now on Amazon, too, for pre-order if anybody's interested. But
beautiful. Yeah. And we'll have the links there on our website, inspirenationshow.com, get you over to your site as well. Well, I want to thank you so much for being on. After this, we'll record a meditation. So if you want more, come listen to the bonus meditation as well. I want to thank you so much for being on the show. This is incredibly helpful, and love your work you're doing. For everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, have compassion for your worries and concerns, and for yourself. Get the Mindfulness and Acceptance Workbook for Anxiety, and shine bright. Woohoo! Thank you.
Oh, it's great.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
That was a lot of fun. Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also leave your comments. Have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, inspirenationshow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!